Hi, everybody. I'm including a narrated version of the PowerPoint that I did for you in Boothbay. So you have all the books as well as my voice kind of talking about them. I hope you'll find this helpful. So we're going to start. I love this quote. Having a huge number of books is not exactly about reading them all. It's about the possibility of reading them all. And I feel that way a lot. I have a lot of books that I keep promising myself I'm going to get to them one of these days. And so they sit on the shelf waiting until that day when I pick them up, and I guess they really are excited. Um, I'm going to be talking today about books. What a surprise. Lions and tigers and foxes and books. And I wanted to start by invoking this wonderful quote from Louise Rosenblatt, who said, "Books do not simply happen to people, people also happen to books." And the reason I start with that is to kind of explain um, how I pick books, how they get into these presentations. As of today, and I'm recording this in June, I've read 515 books. There's not enough time in the world to talk to you about all of them. So I have to make some choices along the way. And that's difficult sometimes because I have lots of wonderful books that I could include. But I'm trying to include here that the books that I think not only happen to me, but the books that will happen to you as well. So if you're wondering how, why, that's kind of sort of how I narrow things down. Here's all the contact information for me, and if you want to, you can take a screenshot of this. But it's my email address, drl@shsu.edu, my Twitter handle, which is Professor Nana, and one of the two blogs that I maintain, the Professor Nana Live Journal blog, is more about educational topics than anything else. Things I do in my spare time. This should not surprise anybody, and it's probably things you do in your spare time too. I read books, I buy books, I research books, I review books, I smell books, I rearrange books, I weed books, I add books to the shelf. Not only do I smell them, but I hold them, I feel them, I take the cover off and look at what's inside. I have a lot of different things that I do with books. So this, you already know what this address is if you're looking at the video. This is Professors Providing Professional Development. Karen Perry and I began this several months ago as a way to put videos like this, as well as videos that we use for our classes, up online. We're PPPD 2016. So I'm going to divide up the talk a little bit today by using some kind of general categories, I think, to help us along the way. The first section is called Going Graphic, and it includes both fiction and nonfiction categories. And graphic novels have just become something that I think has reached into almost every classroom. I think almost everybody is now aware that when I use the term graphic novel, that I'm not talking about something that's graphic, but I'm talking about something that conveys a lot of its meaning through illustration and through text. To me, graphic novels are the logical extension of the picture book in middle school and high school. So I have quite a few that I want to include here. There's a whole series of comics. There's mythology comics. This one is fable comics. And in this particular collection, some of the world's greatest graphic novel illustrators tell a fable. Sometimes the fable is familiar. You can see there the hare and the tortoise on the cover. The fox and the grapes is also up there, but sometimes they are fables that they have either invented or fables from different countries. So if you want to share fables with kids in a new and interesting way, fable comics might just be the thing that you want to do. Jean Lewin Yang is our children's literature ambassador this year, and he is also an accomplished graphic novelist. He won the Prince Award for his graphic novel, and now he's kind of moved into some different areas as well. Gene was a computer science teacher until just this year when he quit to do this kind of stuff full time. And these are the first two books in a wonderful series called Secret Coders. The first book introduces you to our main characters and to some very basic logo coding, how to look at coding in a different way. Paths and portals take us up a notch in terms of coding. So we go from just kind of really simple kind of codes to things that are a little bit more complex. I assume, and I really hope, that as this series continues, we'll have more and more information about coding. We'll get to learn more about how we should code. This is a graphic novel from Turkey. It's called Dare to Disappoint, and it's the story of two sisters, one who is an absolutely perfect student, an absolutely perfect daughter, and her younger sister, who thinks nothing that she will do will ever be quite the same. I love that it's set in Turkey. I love that despite the fact that it's set in Turkey, it still has an awful lot to say to kids all over the world in terms of how we measure up and how we generally do feel that we're not doing everything that we could do. This is the Stratford Zoo's Midnight Review production of Romeo and Juliet. You can see that their Romeo and Juliet is a little bit different. Here's Juliet right here. In the lower right-hand corner. It contains some of the bard's words. You get soliloquies in there, but you also get a lot of information from people who are sitting in the audience and kind of talking about what's going on stage. Think of it as a Mystery Science Theater 2000 production that centers on Shakespeare, which is kind of cool. Comic Squad is a collection of short graphic novel stories, in this case about lunch, that include works by Cece Bell, Nathan Hale, Jenny and Matt Holmes, Cecil Castellucci, Jarrett Krasowska, and other folks that your kids who are graphic novel fans will certainly love. The first book in this series was called Comic Squad Recess. This one is Lunch. I'm hoping that, again, that will continue as well. What I love about this book is it allows kids to do some comparison and say, oh, I understand. When I see this illustration, I'm looking at the work of Jenny and Matt Holm. When I see this kind of illustration, I'm looking at the work of Nathan Hale. Cece Bell's stuff tends to look like this. So it basically shows them the critical attributes, at least in terms of illustration, of different graphic novelists. How Toons is a nonfiction series of graphic novels. This particular one is called Reignition, and it centers on energy. You can see here the lowly peanut and all the different things that the peanut can do. There's a backstory here of a couple kids who get separated from their parents, and they have to learn how to survive. And of course, one of the things they need is a fuel source. And so they go about exploring. They discover different kinds of objects, minerals, plant life that can help them provide power, which is something they desperately need. Sweater Weather by Sarah Varon is a collection of her early work. If you don't know Sarah Varon, you probably want to certainly look her up, look at her other pieces of graphic novels, her other graphic novels that she's offered kids. She's won several awards for her work. And it's always instructive to me to go back and look at the work they did, if you like, before they became famous. And that's what Sweater Weather is all about. Our second section today features middle grade books. I'm happy to say that middle grade is a very fertile territory, and there are tons of books, and it really did hurt to pare down to the ones I'm going to share with you today. I suspect that I could just simply say, here's the new Sharon Creech, and let it go, because I think that most of you know Love That Dog, and you know her other work not in novels in verse. Moo is a novel in verse, and it's the story of two kids who suddenly find themselves living out in the country, something they don't know anything about. And they discover that because it's summer and their father wants them to be sure to remain active in the summer, he has volunteered their services to help a neighbor take care of her cow. This is not a nice, friendly hi, I'm with Bluebell ice cream kind of cow. This is a cantankerous cow who causes them no end of consternation. It is wonderful, heartfelt, intergenerational. Learn a little bit about taking care of cows too along the way. Again, can't I just say Kate DiCamillo, and you're going to go ahead and read this if you haven't already. This is Raymie Nightingale. It's a story about Nightingale. Nightingale. That's the problem with taping this. And it's a story about family, about friendship, about baton twirling. But mostly it's a story about our innermost longings and yearnings when we're just at that age where we hope that what we're doing will have the desired results. Coob, the backwards book, I hope you can understand that, Coob, the backwards book, is a wonderful book, not for libraries, it's for classroom use because it's a fill in the blank and draw this and do this kind of book. It asks kids to think in very different ways, and I'm always looking for books that aren't really linear kind of thing, but rather kind of take kids to different places, ask them to do some synthesis, ask them to do things that maybe they're not quite comfortable doing. Pax. Oh, Pax. Pax is an incredible story of a boy who is forced to abandon his pet, the fox that he saved when it was just a little kit. And his father, who is going off to fight in war before he takes our main character to stay with his grandfather, stops at the side of the road and says, "You need to leave Pax here." And it's a story from there of survival, of whether or not the boy will ever find Pax or Pax will ever find the boy. But along the way, the boy meets people who help, particularly one kind of cantankerous old lady who says, "I am exactly where I should be, doing exactly what I should be doing." And that is peace. And in the midst of war, perhaps that's all we can hope for. The Mechanical Mind of John Coggan is, I don't know quite how to explain this. It's just a whole lot of fun. It's a rambunctious kind of adventure. Our two main characters, John Coggan and his younger sister, have been forced into basically enslaved labor working in a funeral home, a mortuary. John makes caskets and he's quite skilled at it. And now his sister's going to be turned into the cosmetologist who helps prepare corpses. That's the last straw for John, who takes his sister, grabs his sister, and off they go. John is an incredible, incredible talent. He is not only good at constructing caskets, which, has limited kind of potential, but he is an engineer. He loves to build things and to make them work. And they ricochet from one adventure to the other in this particular middle grade book. Okay, so it's Joan Bauer. Is that enough? This is Soar, the story of a boy who, because of a heart transplant, can't play his favorite sport, but he does manage, when he moves to a new town, to find a team he can coach, a team that will allow him to soar. Greg Neary's new book, True and Nell, is a biographical fiction book about the childhood of Truman Capote and Nell, who we know as Harper Lee. And it's, of course, based in reality. They were childhood friends. And it's just a wonderful story that looks at friendship of two kind of outcast kids and how they find one another during difficult times. Maybe a Fox is by Kathy Appelt and Allison McGee. And it's unusual to find a co-authored book that just is absolutely seamless all the way through the book. I don't want to give away too much of this story because I do think it's one you need to discover and let it unfold on its own. I will tell you not to read it in a public place where crying might be difficult. I've also included here a link to the book trailer for the book that is just absolutely wonderful. If you're starting to notice a theme here in middle grade, we do have quite a few books about foxes and wolves. This is Wolf Hollow. It's about a girl who lives with her family, kind of out in the country, but she travels into school. I mean, she has lots of friends. And there is an eccentric old kind of hermit who lives on their land. He's a man who's been destroyed by war. We would say he's suffering from PTSD. And it's the story of how she builds relationships with her schoolmates, one of whom is an incredible bully, with her family members, and with this very quiet, introspective man who really doesn't want to have much to do with anyone else. Wolf Hollow. Kwame Alexander follows up his remarkable book, The Crossover, with Booked. This one, instead of centering on basketball, centers on soccer. It is a novel in verse as well. I put both covers here for the new Gary Paulsen book. The yellow one is the one that I received. But when I went looking for JPEGs of the cover, I found this other one, and I thought, I kind of like that one too. The title is very descriptive, 6 kids and a stuffed cat. And that's exactly what you get. 6 kids, one of whom has a stuffed cat, stuck in a second-floor bathroom, boys' bathroom, during severe weather. The school just absolutely shuts down and makes all the kids shelter in place. So you've got 6 kids, the new kid with his stuffed cat, and then a really ragtag group of 5 other kids there too. You get about 2/3 of the way through the book, and it comes to an end, and I thought that was kind of odd, and I was looking to see what Gary Paulsen was going to do to make me, kind of want to continue by what I thought would be the logical end to the book. And what he's done is include in that last third of the book a reader's theater, a play version of the novel that you just read. I absolutely adored that. The Best Man by Richard Peck. It's so good to have another book by Richard Peck, especially a contemporary book. And it opens with, I think, just typical great Richard Peck humor. It's the story of a boy who says, this story begins with a wedding and it ends with a wedding. They are very different kinds of weddings, but they both have the potential to be a little disturbing, a little crazy. At the first wedding, he's a little boy and his pants rip, and his mom still makes him walk down the aisle with the ring bearer. The second wedding is when he's a teen. Richard Peck has told an incredible story about bullying, about homosexuality, about friendship, about accepting people for who they are, and he manages to juggle all this without it ever kind of bogging down and becoming a problem novel, so to speak. Maxie's Secrets. Well, just have lots of Kleenex. What can I say? You know the old adage, when you look at a book and it's got a dog on the cover, don't get too attached to the dog. What I love and what works so well with this book by Lynn Plourde is that our narrator tells you in the first chapter that Maxie does not survive the book. I don't care that I know that. It's still a book that absolutely broke my heart. But what makes me laugh is at the end of every chapter, there's one of Maxie's secrets. And there's one for every chapter. And some of them are just incredible. They're all insightful. In other words, they're secrets not just for dogs, but maybe some secrets for us as well. So you can't read all day if you don't start in the morning. I think that's always an interesting kind of observation. When I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is pick up a book. I may read a picture book. I certainly read my Twitter and Facebook and email feeds. I do start in the morning. I do carve out time for me to read every day. So let's change gears a little and look at a group of books that I can only categorize as connections. And I think it'll become apparent as we kind of go through here. The first one is a short story collection called Slasher Girls and Monster Boys. What is not to like? Look at the cover. It is an incredible, incredible audiobook, which is how I experienced this. But here are short stories by some of the finest writers out there today. Not always books that are writers that we associate with horror, with slasher kinds of things. But these are great for those kids that love and grew up with scary stories to tell in the dark. These are a little bit longer, but they have that jump out kind of potential. This is Macbeth, #killing it. And it's part of the OMG Shakespeare series. Juliet, and you see a snippet here from the book about Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet's hashtag is YOLO, you only live once. Hamlet, they've done, I think, 4 plays so far, and they're going to continue with it. It is Shakespeare in text speak. It takes me forever to read this, but it will not take kids forever, I suspect. So I'm wondering if maybe it's just a perfect way to introduce Shakespeare to kids when they're a little bit younger. There's a whole new series of books called Cozy Classics that reduce the classics to one word with an illustration. This is Pride and Prejudice. You see mean. They've also done Moby Dick, which I thought was kind of going to be impossible. And yet, from those one words, I get a sense of theme. I get a sense of character. And I wonder if we couldn't do something like this with kids, to take a classic or even a contemporary book and say, okay, you've got however many double page spreads. And on each double page spread, you have to have an illustration of some kind, and we could make them with Legos if we wanted to. These are made from yarn. And you get one word that encapsulates what's going on in that page. Everland is a dystopic retelling of Peter Pan. All the characters are here. You can see this wonderful illustration right here of Tinkerbell, who's called Bella in the book. It's post-apocalyptic. Almost every adult has been wiped out by a plague in England. And so you've got the lost children, many of whom live underground. And that kind of sets you off on your adventure. It's a great way to tie classics to contemporary and dystopic kinds of books as well. Gary Paulson writes not only screamingly funny books, but we know he can write books that just break whatever boundaries have not been broken. And that's true with Fishbone's Song. It's almost a stream of conscious narrative, and it's the story of a boy who is brought up out in the woods by an elderly man who he says he found him just kind of out in the woods and abandoned. And it's how he's been brought up and the lessons he's learned after going through his childhood and into his young adulthood. It's absolutely exquisite reading, just beautifully phrased. It really is, I think, quite different from anything Gary Paulson has ever done. But we need to understand reading could be dangerous. There's heavy reading, speed reading, overreading, accelerated reading, my favorite, and proofreading. I love all the play on words that you see anymore. There are great comics that have to do with books. So into our third category, instead of connections, now we have relationships. These are books that center on an incredible relationship. Highly Illogical Behavior is the third book from John Corey Whaley. His first book won both the Prince and the Morris for debut novel. His second book was a finalist for the National Book Award. So if you don't already know him, here's somebody that you probably need to know and be looking at. It's an incredible talent. This is the story of two teens. One is an agoraphobic boy who has not left his house for years. He lives there. His parents support him. He is getting therapy, but he absolutely melts down when he has to leave his home. And so we just don't do that right now. Enter into this story a young girl who reads something about him and remembers, oh, I remember him. He's the kid that had the meltdown. And she's applying to a very prestigious college. And she wonders if she makes him kind of an experiment, her goal to get him out of the house, to cure him, if maybe that won't give her a leg up. So you've got two very different kinds of narratives going on here, and you've certainly got something that can come to an incredible climax. American Ace by Marilyn Nelson is the story of a boy whose grandfather dies, and after his death, they learn that his grandfather, it looks like, was one of the Tuskegee Airmen. The problem is, he's not African American, not that he's ever known, and now it calls into question his heritage, what he knew about his grandfather, which is very little. And so he begins to do the research into that. I'm going to tie that with You Can Fly, a novel in verse by Carol Weatherford that is the story not just of the Tuskegee Airmen, you see that on the cover, but it also looks at other African Americans who were trying to join the service at this time, nurses, and other folks who were discriminated against. And it looks at their history, and it does it in verse. It's really incredibly done. Carol Weatherford is, of course, a multiple award winner. Oh, The Wild Robot by Peter Brown. What happens when a robot is dropped? It falls off a ship and wrecks onto a deserted island. No people, just animals. What's going to happen? And that's the story here. The box washes up, a curious seal pokes into the box and activates our robot, who does not understand what it is that she's seeing and has to learn an awful lot about the world around her. It's an incredible exploration of what makes us human. Character driven by David Lupar. Like Gary Paulson's Fishbone Song, this just kind of breaks the mold. I've read all of David Lupar. I love his books. Many of them are hysterically funny. And this book certainly has a wisecracking narrator, but he's dealing with some really, really serious situations. Tim Federley's The Great American Whatever. If you've read 5, 6, 7, 8, then you have an idea of what's in store for you. But now he's moving up a little and writing about a slightly older main character. Still a Work in Progress by Joe Knowles. I will confess that I picked it up because I love the cat on the cover. But I stayed because I love Joe Knowles' writing. If you have not read anything by Joe Knowles, you need to take care of that. Post haste. So an innocent bystander would say, know of any good books? I don't think you're ready for this conversation. I love when people ask me, do I know any good books? And my answer generally is, for you, for someone else, can you tell me what you like? Can you tell me what you don't like? I need to know more. When I'm trying to make some suggestions between book and reader, I want to know more about the reader. So tell me what you've read. Tell me what you really liked that you've read. Tell me what you hated that you've read, and let me make the recommendations from there. So, oops, sorry guys. Changing now to nonfiction. Perhaps the most interesting biography I've read this year is Some Writer. And of course, you should recognize that as a biography of E.B. White, by Melissa Sweet. The illustrations, the layouts in this book are incredible. But most of all, you get to know E.B. White. I thought I knew an awful lot about E.B. White and about Charlotte's Web, but it turns out I didn't know a whole lot until I read this biography. And I love, love, love when I get to learn new stuff. Loving versus Virginia doesn't come out until early next year, but it's a novel, a documentary kind of novel in verse about the Loving family, about the fight to have interracial marriage recognized, the fight that went all the way to the Supreme Court. I'm tying this to Vonda Michaud Nelson's No Crystal Stair. In terms of the format, I think it's really something that pushes it forward quite a bit. It's something very new. And finally, in nonfiction, Radiant Child by Javaka Steptoe. Javaka is the son of the late John Steptoe, and he certainly did follow in his dad's footsteps. Radiant Child is the story of a young artist, Jean-Michel Basquiat. And Steptoe has told the story of this man using the artistic style and characteristics, the medium, the techniques, the colors that Jean-Michel used himself. It's just a fascinating look at art and how what we perceive as art differs from generation to generation, from artist to artist. It's really well done. Fight evil, folks. Read books. And so we get to some picture books here as mentor texts. I'm going to go through some of these pretty quickly. But I loved this thing about libraries and librarians because texts are fine, but seriously, people also need to see real sentences. And I think picture books can do that in a way that's still really accessible. So here's Baba Smart Sheep. I'm not sure that there's much in terms of a mentor text, except that it's just funny and it's how the author builds the funny using illustration as well. It's the story of a sheep who has smart pills. And an animal comes up and says, "What is that?" And the sheep says, "Well, it's smart pills. I guess I could let you have them for, pretty reasonable fee." And the animal just kind of looks at it and says, "They don't look like smart pills." Well, of course, we recognize them for what they really are. Um, but if you're a smart sheep, you probably will not be outwitted in this particular one. Here's an inside page just to give you an idea. Of course, the animal that we're talking about is a turkey, and we can talk about why. And the turkey comes up and says, "How much are they? Smart tablets? Yeah, smarty tablets. To buy? To buy. They're free." "They're free?" "Yes, they're free, but only for turkeys." "Well, I'm a turkey." And you can kind of say, yes, you really are, because you're buying into this whole thing. One Day is an incredible book that all takes place one day, the end. Notice the end in the little comma down there at the bottom. And it takes you through a day. One day I felt like stomping. Stomp, 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 stomp. I love that. And I think it's a great mentor text. We can do an awful lot of writing and illustrating about something like that, because we all have one day when we feel like doing something, one day when we feel like doing something else. A hungry lion, or a dwindling of an assortment of animals. And of course, if you have a hungry lion, chances are you're going to have an assortment of animals that dwindle along the way. And it says, wait a second, this is about midway through. It seems there was just a hungry lion, a turtle, only the floppy-eared rabbit, a frog, a bat, and a pig, and apparently no one else. So where are all these animals disappearing? There's a little twist at the end. Alpha is a pop-up board book that looks at Alpha Bravo Charlie alphabet. So here, E is for echo. Notice that you can kind of see not a surrealistic, but not a literal, more of a figurative interpretation of what an echo might be. So this is definitely a picture book for much older readers. I love Pink is for Blobfish, because it's about all kinds of weird animals who all happen to be pink, including the blobfish, who is really not the most attractive thing in the world. And this is a compendium of those kinds of things. Wolf Camp. You want to learn to be a good wolf, you've got to go to camp. And that's exactly what's happening in this book. You can see the dog who wants to be a wolf, and so he's going to wolf camp. Whoops, sorry. Let me show you what it is. So here you have inside illustration. And here the dog's going to dinner. And dinner tasted less than what they want. Ooh, it's got hair on it. What an interesting flavor. I don't even know what this is. So it's basically some domesticated animals who long to be more wild, but they're having some problems with those desires. And here's I Hear a Pickle, and Smell, See, Touch, and Taste It Too by Rachel Isadora. It looks at all the different ways that you can look at things. You can hear these kinds of things. You can smell these kinds of things. It forces kids to consider their senses in a slightly different way. Freedom in Congo Square is a celebration of Congo Square outside of New Orleans. It was a community where African Americans could basically celebrate their freedom, be who they wanted to be. Look at the great illustrations inside as well. I love this book. This is called The Night Gardener. It's the story of a boy who one night wakes up and he sees a gardener who is going from tree to tree, bush to bush, and shaping them into different animals and transforming the neighborhood. Sorry about that, guys. And here is Dylan the Villain. This is a book that really uses vocabulary in an interesting way. He's born, you can kind of see him here, blah, ha, ha, ha. And the doctor says, you have a lovely villain. So you have ne'er-do-wells, you've got all kinds of scoundrels and wastrels and all kinds of other things like that. And when Dylan goes to school, he thinks he's the most evil, but he's not. Here are a couple books about foster parenting and adoption, really unusual topics that I think are good to share with lots of kids. Elliot is the story of a little rabbit who has to be taken from his parents, put in a foster situation. He's returned to his parents. His parents still can't take care of him the way they should, so he goes to a different family. This occurs several different times. And quite frankly, as much as that sometimes I think bothers us, for kids who have been in the system, this is much more realistic. I love the cover of My New Mom and Me, and you can see that baby doesn't look very much like mom. And with all of the adoptions going on, I think that that's probably, again, another wonderful book to share with kids in terms of we need diverse books. These are diverse books. And so are these. Tell Me a Tattoo Story, and My Dad Used to Be Cool. And what you're starting to get are kind of everyday fathers who have tattoos. And for them, it's just no big deal. And Tell Me a Tattoo Story, the little boy at night will point to a tattoo and tell his dad, tell me about this one. Tell me what this one means. And it's just an incredible, quiet, wonderful bonding kind of time. Space Dumplings should be back with graphic novels, and I apologize for that. I don't even know how that got in here. But it's the story, again, post-apocalyptic graphic novel, a girl whose mother is a scientist and her father is a space garbage man, and how she becomes kind of involved in both of their lives along the way. Some new metafiction coming out. I love metafiction, fiction about fiction, books where the characters have a sense they're in a book, like, we're in the wrong book, help us find our way back. This is my book. Snapsy the alligator did not ask to be in this book. They're wonderful, they're funny, and they teach kids about fictional elements. And of course, here are some more picture books that you can use as mentor texts. What to Do with a Box. Be a Friend. There's the Night Gardener again. Ideas Are All Around. Red, A Crayon Story, and The Tree in the Courtyard, which is just an incredible story of the tree that grew outside Anne Frank's window when she was living in the attic. Finally, there's a Steve Weinberg here behind my face called You Must Be This Tall. What happens when two friends go to a park and one is not tall enough, but they're both snakes. So there's a way to kind of get that done. So seeing someone you love with a book is kind of like seeing a book recommending a person. I don't know how many of you do, but I always look to see what someone else is reading. Sometimes I'll strike up a conversation. So grand finale, I've saved kind of my favorite books here till the end. Lily and Duncan by Donna Gephardt is the story of Lily, who's transgender, and Duncan, who's dealing with some mental health kinds of issues. Again, it's a skillful blending of two different kinds of characters who end up becoming friends, but it doesn't happen easily, and there are lots of missteps along the way. Shrunken Treasures are literary classics that are done in poetry form. You can even sing some of them. Ahab only had one leg, had one leg, had one leg. Ahab only had one leg, the others with the whale. It's just kind of fun to play with that kind of language. And finally, it's an audiobook. It's Grimm's Fairy Tale, full cast recording, and it's a wonderful compilation of incredible narrators. Katie Kellgren's here, Scott Brick is here, the voices that you grow to really know well when you're listening to audiobooks. And here they're telling the Grimm's version of the fairy tales. And I love that because the Grimm's truly are kind of grim. They're very dark. It's not really romanticized. There's an awful lot of lopping off of feet. There's dancing to your death in iron shoes. And they're actually the fairy tales you want to listen to and read for older kids. So think about this as an audiobook and a way to introduce kids to motifs, to archetypes, because you can do that definitely in Grimm's Fairy Tale. Finally, a book a day keeps stupidity away. If we read every day, if we read as widely, as deeply, as we possibly can, we can help match books to kids, keep kids interested, maybe create some new readers along the way. Thank you.